Today we're making some homemade mac and cheese. Now this is a mac and cheese that, much like our salsa con queso, is completely free of Velveeta, has no weird oils in it, nothing unusual, just real cheese, real ingredients, and real delicious. Let's get started. Alright, so to make this mac and cheese, it's a very, very simple sauce. And as I said before, this is going to have all simple, all real ingredients. No Velveeta, no weird oils, just good stuff. So first thing you're going to need is starting with some butter. You're going to use a full stick for this because we're going to make a roux. So we use a full stick of butter. We're going to use some flour. We're really only going to use about a quarter cup. So it's going to be more of a thin roux, but it's still going to work perfectly. And trust me, that's really all you need. Technically, you could get by doing the same amount of butter and flour. I do a little more butter because you're going to add more, you would want more butter in the sauce anyway. It just gives it more flavor. Next thing you're going to need is some milk. I like using a can of evaporated milk. If you don't want to use that, you can just as easily use about the same amount, which is 12 ounces of any other kind of milk, whichever you prefer. Then, of course, you're going to need some cheese. I like using cheddar cheese. In this case, I have some extra sharp cheddar. There's about 5.5 ounces here. Probably use about 4 of that, but we may just use the whole thing. Either way, it's not really going to make a huge difference. You can obviously use whatever kind of cheese you prefer for that. Now, the most important ingredient to make this extra creamy without having to use Velveeta is cream cheese. So we're actually going to use an entire package of this. And then the very last ingredient we'll be adding, which is something that I don't have pictured here, is just water. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to create a roux. We'll add milk to it. Then we'll add the regular cheese to it. We'll add the cream cheese to it. Once all that's combined, we'll add some water. In this case, because we're making mac and cheese, we're going to use actual water from the pasta. So we'll prepare the macaroni ahead, and then we will go ahead and add some of that pasta water, which has the extra starch to help thicken it up, but at the same time thin things out so that you get a really nice creamy sauce without adding the richness that you typically get from extra milk or any other kind of dairy.
And one thing I forgot to mention is you need macaroni, of course, obviously, but in addition to that, also, you'll want to have some seasoning salt or any other kind of salt. It's just basically give a little bit of extra seasoning if you need it.
So, with all that being said, let's get started.
So to get this started, we're going to melt a full stick of butter in our pan, get that fully melted. And while we're doing that, we also have our water going. I recommend definitely putting the water in the stock pot before you get started making the sauce. That way you can have your water boiling so that when the time comes that you need pasta water, you already have it ready to go. Now we haven't started cooking our pasta yet, but we are going to go ahead and just get our butter melted first to get the roux going. In this case, I'm using a 5-quart cast iron Dutch oven. Obviously you can use whatever kind of saucepan you have, but I definitely recommend using something around the size of 5 quarts for a batch this size because it's going to fill up quite a bit with the amount of macaroni you have. And although we're only doing 1 pound, that 1 pound will fill this up pretty well. So definitely start with that and we'll get the butter melted. And once the butter's fully melted, you'll want to go ahead and add your 1/4 cup of flour. And you just want to mix it in as best as you can. It's going to be more of a thin roux when it's all mixed up, but basically you're just trying to get rid of all the chunks so that the flour doesn't burn, and it will really help to thicken up the sauce as you add the remaining ingredients. Now once it's sufficiently mixed, we'll add our full can of evaporated milk. And once again, you don't have to use evaporated milk. I personally prefer using it just because of the fact that since it has less liquid in it, it tends to do a better job for making these sauces without diluting it too much. And that might seem counterintuitive because you're going to dilute it later with pasta water, but in this case, it really just does make a difference in how the sauce comes together, specifically with emulsion. You basically just want to mix that up until it comes to a good thickness. It might take a little bit, typically, since I'm doing this on a medium-high heat, it takes a little bit to warm up the milk enough to really get it start to thicken. But once it starts to thicken, that's when we'll add our cheddar cheese. And obviously, if you're using a different kind of cheese, you can add the other kind of cheese at that same point. Seems to be to about a good thickness now, so we're going to add our 6 ounces of cheese. And those 6 ounces, I just add it all at once. You don't really technically have to. You can do it a little bit at a time, and a lot of people would say, oh, that's how you should do it. It's a little bit at a time and mix it all up. But personally, I find it doesn't make that big of a difference. The cheese melts about the same regardless, and because of the fact that this is going to be stirred quite a bit, and then we're going to be adding the pasta water to it later to further help to thin it out, help to get it more creamy, then you shouldn't have too much of an issue here. But either way, you just want to get it stirred until it's well incorporated into the sauce mixture. And then at this point, we're going to add our full package of cream cheese. And if you have let it warm up to room temperature, it's going to be easier to work with. In this case, I did do that, but sometimes I've just added it cold, and it just takes a little more work to get it going. But either way, it would work just fine. Now, as you mix this, it's going to be a very thick sauce. But that's the reason why we have our pasta water as planned to add after the pasta's ready. So we're just going to mix this up until the cream cheese is fully melted and fully mixed. And then at that point, we will go ahead and get our macaroni cooked. And look at that, though. That is beautiful, isn't it? Nice and creamy, coming together really well. A beautiful color. No dyes, of course, nothing like that, just all real ingredients. And it's going to be super, super good. All right, at that point, we'll turn down the heat to low just to let that simmer for a little bit and get our macaroni cooking in our boiling water. And I always add some salt to my boiling water. Some people will say just do a pinch of it. I've heard it otherwise. Salt your pasta water like the ocean rather than salting your sauce. So I'm adding quite a bit. Now in this case, I actually made up 2 pounds of macaroni, but that's because of the fact that I'm actually doing both this batch of macaroni and cheese as well as a secondary batch for next week's recipe because I'm filming both at the same time. So you just, typically I would say when you're cooking the macaroni, do it about a minute below the lowest, because once you add it to the macaroni or to the cheese sauce, then you're going to end up cooking it up the rest of the way, and that way you'll still get a nice firmness to it without it being too undercooked or too overcooked. So we'll go ahead and get the pasta cooking, and when it's all done, we'll add it to the sauce. At this point, our pasta is done, so we're going to go ahead and turn off the heat, and then we're going to scoop out about 2 cups of pasta water. We might not use all of it, but we might as well have more than what we need just in case. And so then we'll go ahead and strain our pasta, and we can add it to the sauce. And once again, since we're actually going to make 2 separate batches of mac and cheese for 2 different kinds of mac and cheese, I added both pounds of the mac and cheese to the sauce mixture. So we'll get all of that mixed up first just to get the macaroni well coated, and then once it's well coated, we'll add the pasta water. Once the sauce is sufficiently thinned out, we'll split up the mac and cheese so that we can actually get the 2 different batches prepared. And if you look at that sauce is just coming together beautifully. It's not like the typical orange you would expect to see for mac and cheese sauce, but it's also because there's no dyes in it. So you are just dealing with the natural color from the cheddar cheese, and then, you know, the other ingredients mixed together. So it ends up being more of like a white looking cheese sauce, but trust me, it still has all the flavor, in this case, of extra sharp cheddar, and it's just going to be absolutely glorious. And we're just going to add a little bit of seasoning salt as well to this, just to give it some additional flavor, because when you add the pasta water, it does tone down the saltiness quite a bit. We're not going overboard. I added roughly about a tablespoon, give or take. It's honestly just kind of a season to taste, but since we're dealing with 2 pounds of pasta right here, I added a bit more than I probably would otherwise. And it's a good idea to add more pasta water than you think you're going to need as well, especially because if, of course, you end up in a situation where the sauce is a little bit too thick, the sauce thinning it out with the pasta water will help it to just better coat everything. And additionally, it will also just help to offset the saltiness if you accidentally put too much salt in there. If you look at that, isn't that gorgeous? We're all ready, so we're going to go ahead and get this plated up.
And now the taste test. Got the plain mac and cheese with a bit of green onion on top.
So creamy and cheesy. And very, very good.
All right, let's give this a try. Do a bite with a bit of green onion here. I'm telling you, putting cream cheese in there instead of Velveeta just makes such a difference, because you don't end up with that gritty texture you normally get when you use real cheese, but you still get, all the good flavor of the sharp cheddar. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like if you liked this video, subscribe to the channel and share with your friends, and stay tuned for more recipes that, while not necessarily authentic, are always delicious. We're gonna create a roux. We'll add cheese to it, add the cream cheese to it,
Seems to be to about a good thickness now, so we're going to add our 4.5, further help to thin it out and help to cream it up. I've heard it otherwise, salt your pasta water and not your